And welcome, everybody, to another amazing day, amazing week right here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. I am honored to have Congressman James Comer joining us, joining the show today, mainly to talk about his book here, All the President's Money. Congressman, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Now, sorry for not knowing this, but is this your first book?
Yeah, my first book. I always wanted to write a book, and HarperCollins approached me about doing a book about the Biden investigation, and I jumped at the opportunity.
And it's interesting, correct me if I'm wrong, but based upon reading the book, it seems your main motivation behind writing it was you felt like the full understanding of exactly how corrupt the Bidens are wasn't really getting out to the public. And you certainly did a good job of laying it out for at least a layman like myself to understand exactly what's going on. Now, you really dive into the evidence there, but one thing that kind of struck me as you were laying out, I mean, they received a lot of money. You know, according to the book, tens of millions of dollars that we suspect they received, or you were able to prove through bank records that went into their accounts from dubious sources. But, you know, considering what the foreign countries or companies seem to get in return, it kind of seemed like a low amount of money. It was actually a pretty good bang on their buck for that. Is that because, you know, that's just the money you could easily prove and you suspect there was more, or do you think they just sold themselves kind of cheap, sold the country out kind of cheap?
Well, I mean, you know, $1 million here, $3.5 million there. That's pretty good money. But, you know, at the end of the day, they were dealing with just criminals in these foreign countries. The China money, as I argue in the book, wasn't from a Chinese energy company like the media said. It was from China. It was from the country of China. They were, you know, wanting to give the Bidens money so they could have leverage over the Biden. I think that's one reason why you see Donald Trump's going in and putting pressure on Mexico with one request on these tariffs: stop the fentanyl that comes from China, stop packing it across the border, and, you know, just stop purchasing the fentanyl from China. And you know, Biden couldn't do any of that because they had that hanging over his head that his family took that money. And I think that's, you know, is a perfect example of the national security concern. But I did write the book because the media just wasn't telling the truth with respect to what the Bidens did. We found all this evidence. Everything in the book I presented at press conferences and bank memorandum releases, and we were very transparent during the investigation. But the liberal media would just report no evidence. They didn't tie anything to Joe Biden when we did, but they would say that. And then, you know, my friends in the conservative media, they would kind of talk about, you know, things that really didn't matter. They would talk about, well, this is what AOC said, or this is what, you know, the squad put out. And you know, that really didn't matter what the squad put out. What mattered was making sure people knew this was a bribe and they didn't pay any taxes on it, and they violated all these laws. But anyway, it was therapy for me writing the book, and I think that I hope it's been well received.
Well, and you know, that is one thing in the book. You clearly are frustrated with the media throughout the book because, and I think for you, it's like you're seeing a house that's on fire and nobody's like paying attention. This house is on fire. But, you know, another thing that kind of struck me was just how small of a world it is between kind of the politicos, the political operators, whether that's amongst Congress or amongst our federal agencies, and then also the, you know, the media. You for those of you who didn't read the book, you talked about a story about the Duceys. Could you go over that real quick for those who haven't read the book yet about that weird connection between the Duceys and the government?
Yeah. So, you know, I go on Fox a lot. I was on Fox yesterday and the day before, and I'm booked to be on Fox tomorrow. Fox has been good to me, but, you know, a big family on Fox are the Ducey family. You've got Steve Ducey, who does Fox and Friends, and then Peter Ducey is the White House correspondent. And, you know, everybody that watches Fox likes the Duceys, and I don't have any issue with the Duceys. But they have a daughter that works for, her name's Mary, works for the FBI. She's, in fact, the counsel for FBI, like the main.
And that was under the Biden administration.
under the Biden administration. Yes.
Yeah.
And nobody knew that. And I knew it, but it is what it is. But when I would have to go down into what's called the SCIF, which is for classified information during this Biden investigation, the FBI was not telling me the truth. They were withholding information from me. I went down. We knew we had a document from a whistleblower in the FBI had turned it over to Chuck Grassley and myself, or they turned it over to Grassley, and then Grassley passed it to me because Chuck Grassley from Iowa, the Senate at the time was in the minority, so he didn't have subpoena power, and I did. So we're subpoenaing this information or threatening to subpoena. And they said, all right, we'll have a meeting in the classified. You can look at this. And it pertained to Joe Biden. It pertained to a potential bribe that Joe Biden got. I mean, that's a big deal. The president of the United States.
Right.
There's
one thing too is you said in the book that it wasn't actually a classified document.
It wasn't. It was not.
And they still wanted to meet in the SCIF.
They still wanted to meet in the SCIF, and I did. We went down there, and she was the lawyer, so she slid it over to me, and it was redacted. It just had black lines all through it. And I'm like, really? Are you serious? And I shoved the paper back at her. And, I don't know if I should have done that or not. It probably wasn't her fault. She was probably just following orders from Christopher Wray. But from that point on, Steve Doocy just said a lot of negative things about the investigation. And the problem with that was MSNBC and CNN and NBC and CBS and ABC, they would take that clip of anything negative Steve Doocy would say, and they would run it. Even Fox News says Comer doesn't have anything. And it was very damaging. And I felt like, I was suffering the consequences. And, the fact that you go on, Fox was talking so much about the deep state, and then, they've got a, close relative that's the lawyer for the deep state, and they got real mad, obviously, over that in the book. But, at the end of the day, that when I talk about things that were damaging in the investigation, the Doocy, he had several sound bites that he said on Fox and Friends that were very damaging. One, he said, Comer didn't ask any questions in the deposition. I have the best lawyers in Washington, D.C. I had the main lawyer that did the depositions, the criminal depositions during the first Trump administration on my staff that was doing the deposition. Jim Jordan was in my committee. He didn't ask any questions either when we were dealing with the Bidens, because we were dealing with the most expensive legal team in the world. This was the O.J. Simpson equivalent of a legal team that the Bidens had. And I'm not an attorney, and I wanted to have the best people asking questions. Well, he attacked me on that. I'm like, what? No one ever asked. Your attorneys ask the questions during deposition. Sure. And they made a big deal out of that. And he would say, that looks to me like they struck out again. And every committee hearing we would have, he would make one snarky remark on Fox, and the other networks would just run it for days. Even Fox says Comer doesn't have anything. When you see the book, all the stuff, especially in the appendix at the end, shows the bank records and the emails and the text messages, and it proves that they were the Biden crime family. And it was real frustrating. That's what motivated me to write the book. So that was the part about that family in the book.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's very interesting. There's a few other things in the book I want to ask you about, but we'll be back here after a short break, continue our conversation here with the Congressman. You're listening to the Andrew Cooperrider Show. And you're back here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show, joined by Congressman Comer, discussing all the president's money, his new book, talking about his time on the House Oversight Committee, looking at the Biden family. Now, we discussed a little bit about the small world of politics, but, one thing you've done in the book is it seems like you're very open. Some frustration I sometimes have with congressmen, even ones that, generally speaking, a lot of people like. Right now, of course, you have Tulsi Gabbard, a part of the Trump administration. I remember when Trump was running for office, she was doing an interview on some podcast, and she was telling stories about Congress and Congress people and things like that. And she wouldn't actually name the names of the Congress people that was involved in the story. Now, in the book, you do name the names. When you tell a story, you're never telling a story and saying a congressman came up to me. You're saying which congressman came up to me. And you know, you say good things about Congress people. You say bad things about the same congressperson within the book. Have you gotten any pushback, or has it affected any relationships being that open in the book there in Congress?
Well, the ones that I criticize the most, especially the Republicans, the relationship was damaged because they weren't cooperating with us. You know, you had the chairman of an intelligence committee, and we had chairman of, at the time, what was called a China Select Committee, and I begged them to. They had staff, they had resources. I gave them specific things pertaining to the China money with the China Task Force, and with the Romanian and Kazakhstani money pertaining, to the investigation for the Intelligence Committee, and they refused to do it. And then when the FBI would withhold information, the FBI would say, well, we've passed that along to the Intelligence Committee. Well, I would go to the Intelligence Committee chairman and I'm say, I need to see that. And they're like, no, you're not on the Intelligence Committee. And I'm like, you could imagine what I would say to him. But then, there's criticism. I'm friends with Matt Gaetz. I was on Matt Gaetz's show last week. He does a show now on One America News. And I was critical at times of Matt Gaetz in the book, and at times I was very complimentary. He is an attorney, and he did participate in some depositions. I brought him in to help with my legal team in deposing Hunter Biden. And Matt Gaetz did better than anybody. I mean, he is a very talented attorney, very smart. My criticism of Gaetz was when he did that motion to vacate, the media said the Republicans got rid of Kevin McCarthy as speaker. There were 8 Republicans led by Matt Gaetz that joined with 211 Democrats to get rid of McCarthy. And what that did was that absolutely broke the Republican conference. There was no chance to ever impeach Joe Biden once that happened. The moderates were so mad. We went 3.5 weeks without a speaker. If the Biden legal team had been smart, they'd have gone to court. I would not have had an attorney there because our attorney is appointed by the speaker. When the speaker was vacated, there was no counsel for the U.S. House of Representatives. I mean, all I had were staff attorneys. And I'm sitting there, the stress level on me that this whole investigation is going to fall apart if they went to court, because technically we don't have a Speaker of the House. It's never happened before. And that was a problem. That set us back. It set us back, in the beginning, he wouldn't support McCarthy. And that was, there were a lot of setbacks in the investigation. But then when he ultimately vacated the chair, that made the moderate Republicans say, we're not doing any of these right-wing things. And, I would try to talk to him. Look, he's taking money from China. China is walking all over us. They're stealing our intellectual property. They're stealing our patents. They're charging us tariffs. We're not charging them tariffs. And they don't care. They just got mad at Matt Gaetz and the Freedom Caucus bunch, and they would not vote to impeach for anything. And they knew that he committed an impeachable offense. And so that was, I criticized Gaetz in there, and he and I talk about it, and we're good. I'm going to go on his show next week. But
also in the book,
yeah.
You do, in a way, if you don't come out and say it, but it does seem like you defend their position in a way by, it seems like McCarthy made a lot of deals that he broke. I mean, he made a deal with you on how many people would be on your committee, and that didn't work out. He came to you out of the blue about the impeachment before you were ready and had fully dug into everything you wanted to dig into. So it does seem like, while for the greater cause of it, it's kind of like, what's your better option to people like Gaetz and things. But at the same time, it does, reading the book did explain to me a lot of their frustration with McCarthy, because it did seem like he kind of wheeled and dealed,
He did.
but didn't really follow through on promises, made too many promises. Would you say that's pretty accurate?
Yeah, that's 100% accurate. So the Oversight Committee investigates. We don't impeach. The Judiciary Committee impeaches. My friend Jim Jordan's the chairman of the Judiciary Committee. McCarthy, I suspect all I was doing was investigating the Bidens, and we were doing a good job. We were getting their bank records, and I was following the laundering. We had the bank violations that showed where banks caught them laundering money, and then we were putting it all together. We had a room with chalkboards up, like in a police movie where you got all these names and eras and stuff. We were tracing all that money and doing a good job. And then McCarthy starts getting squeezed by Gates. And he says, all right, we're going to go to impeachment. He called me and he says, we're going to change your investigation to impeachment inquiry. I didn't even know what that was. And I said, so you're going to turn my investigation over to Jordan? Because the Judiciary, and he said, no, you're going to still be impeachment inquiry. That wasn't even a thing. The reason he did that is because we were getting at the point we were going to have to pass a continuing resolution, just like the one we're going to have to pass next week that Trump's trying to get us to pass. And Gates didn't want that. And McCarthy promised we wouldn't do that again, but Congress is broken. And he thought, well, I'll make everybody happy. I'll put in this continuing resolution, impeachment inquiry. That'll please the Freedom Caucus. And then, I'll please the moderates as well. And that was ridiculous. That was a pipe dream, and it didn't happen. But it drugged me in, and then the media really attacked me because they're like, we know the House of Representatives ain't going to impeach anybody, especially after Mayorkas had been impeached in the House, and the Senate didn't even have a trial like they're supposed to. I mean, the Senate is not going to do anything. It doesn't matter what you do. The Senate's not going to convict anyone. They never have, and they probably never will unless all of a sudden we don't have such a hyper-partisan environment.
Yeah, and that is one thing. You do express a fair amount of frustrations with just how Congress is operating right now, because you felt like you were on a timeline. And obviously you were. I mean, if you wanted to get to Hunter Biden, to Joe Biden, to Jim Biden, you had to beat before Biden would end up impeaching them. Or not impeaching them. Sorry, Biden would end up pardoning them and kind of slowing you down. But through that investigation, what was the most jaw-dropping realization you had? I mean, you're digging through those bank records, and then you end up, I've dug through spending records and things like that, and I've seen some things that just blow my mind. What blew your mind the most? Was it the sports car? It seemed like it was the sports car, but what was it for you?
Well, obviously there were rumors that they had taken money. We found it all. We found that it had been laundered. The thing that was most shocking about the investigation was that the government knew full well what they were doing, and they knew it before Joe Biden ever became president. You had the IRS was investigating the Bidens. The Securities and Exchange Commission was investigating Bidens. Medicare was investigating Bidens for Medicaid fraud in one of their schemes. The FBI was investigating the Bidens, and the Department of Justice in 3 different jurisdictions were investigating the Bidens. Every time it would get to the point to where they would have to talk to Joe Biden, because everyone knew this money was only coming into the Biden family accounts because of Joe Biden. I mean, there was no question with any investigator in the world, even though the media would say, well, this has nothing to do with Joe Biden. Everybody knew it, and they all requested to sit down with either Hunter Biden or Jim Biden or Joe Biden. And then you would have these deep state bureaucrats that would rise up and say, no, you're not allowed to talk to the Biden, even when he wasn't president. And unfortunately, a lot of this happened during the Trump administration. I think Trump learned a lot. I've talked to Trump a lot about this, and I'm a huge Kash Patel fan at the FBI. But, the Trump's deep state bureaucrats were doing everything in their ability to protect the Bidens because they wanted rid of Trump. And if now you're seeing Joe Biden's been kicked out, he was kicked off the ticket, You saw yesterday, Hunter Biden's lawyers just walked off and left him because he wasn't paying them any money more. He wasn't paying them. It was Democrat special interest.
I heard his art sales have plummeted too
Yeah,
as well.
yeah, well, yeah. Nobody, yeah, believe it or not, nobody's buying his art now. Now that Joe's not president, so you're going to see more and more come out. Jake Tapper, who I criticized in the book because he was dishonest about how he reported on the investigation, he's got a book out coming out in 3 weeks about how everybody knew Joe Biden was, in the early stages of dementia, but yet they covered it up. I'm like, you attacked me. Jake Tapper attacked me on the show because I said he was a mental invalid, which is what he is. I mean, he's got early forms of dementia, if not full blown dementia. That was what Robert Hur said in the Hur report. So it was just shocking that the government knew about all this. The Treasury had all those bank records, and the 6 different banks notified the federal government that the Bidens were money laundering, they were evading taxes, they were being bribed, that they were violating the Foreign Agents Registration Act, which is 5 years in prison. And the government didn't do anything about it. That was the most shocking thing to me, because I just assumed nobody in the government knew it. And then I found out every government agency knew it. Treasury knew it. FBI knew it. CIA knew it. Department of Justice knew it. IRS knew it. And they were all told to stand down.
Well, coming up after this, we'll talk about where what do we do with this information now? I'll ask you, how do we fix Congress? And we'll dig into maybe one more issue. We'll have that after this short break. And you're back here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show, joined by Congressman Comer, digging into his book, All the President's Money. You lay out a pretty convincing case. You even provide supporting documents about the LLCs, the shell companies, the way the money flow through the LLCs. You even were able to trace, a direct payments from China flowed through some Biden family members' accounts to end up in Joe Biden's account. That just happened to be 10%, 10% for the big guy. But with all that in mind, and with the pardons, though, where do you hope it goes from here? What do we do with the information? We read this book, we get upset, we see the obvious corruption. Mm-hmm. What do we do to change it?
Well, first of all, there's 2 crimes that we uncovered. We uncovered, obviously, the Biden financial crimes, but we also uncovered the massive government cover-up. As I said earlier, you had multiple government agencies that knew what the Bidens were doing, but yet they did nothing about it. The prison system is full of people that violated the Foreign Agents Registration Act. The Bidens did that, nothing. The prisons are full of people that have evaded taxes for much less than what the Bidens evaded. Nothing for the Bidens. The prison system's full of people that were caught money laundering. Again, nothing for Biden. The list goes on and on of the crimes that the Bidens, the family committed, nothing. So the government was involved in a cover-up. Kash Patel is the new FBI director. Kash Patel, I met Kash Patel when I first came to Washington 8.5 years ago. He was a staff attorney on the Oversight Committee, on the committee. And at that time, Trey Gowdy was chairman of the committee. So, you've always had good attorneys on the Oversight Committee, good staffers on the Oversight Committee. So Kash Patel, obviously he's written books about the deep state and all of that. He and I have spoken multiple times. And I will say this, I'm pretty confident that people in the government are going to be held accountable. And I'm not just talking about losing their job. A lot of them resigned when Kash Patel walked in the front door. They just resigned. But we've got lists of all the names. And, Trump's got lists of names of people that lied about the Steele dossier and the Russia collusion and all that. A lot of them are the same people. A lot of the same names that were weaponizing the judicial system against Trump were the ones that were protecting the Bidens. So it's a clear abuse of power. And I'm pretty confident something's going to happen to them. With respect to the Biden family, I've reached out to Pam Bondi. My staff's communicating with her staff. And, I said these pardons will never hold up in court. You cannot pardon an entire family for an 11-year period for anything. There's no way that's going to hold up in court. And I've strongly encouraged her, because it's going to have to be the judiciary. It's going to have to be the Department of Justice. All I can do is investigate. And I write that in the book. People would comment on social media, why don't you arrest them? Well, I can't arrest them. I don't have handcuffs. I'm not allowed to arrest them. I'm not allowed to sentence people to prison. I investigate, and we turn it over to the Department of Justice, or we turn it over to the FBI, which is part of the Department of Justice. So we've done that. If Pam Bondi wants, what I think she should do is bring the Biden family in for depositions. And if she doesn't, I think she should publicly call for me to do that. Me or Jim Jordan one to do that. Bring them in for deposition. And I think that the fact that we were never allowed to get Joe Biden's bank records. I found Joe Biden's money through the money laundering process. You can't get a president's bank records. If you could, the Democrats would have gotten Donald Trump's bank records when he was president the first time.
That's true.
So the Department of Justice can, and there's so many documents that the FBI and CIA have that where informants say Joe Biden had an offshore account, and they wouldn't let me put that in the book because I didn't have, I had to have 100% evidence in writing, because the Biden legal team was threatening to sue HarperCollins Publishing Company because I was writing a book. And there's just lots of government documentation from their paid informants that say that if the paid informants aren't telling the truth, then they don't need to be paid by the government anymore. But what the paid informants have said is they've turned all this into the government. They've turned in their sources and how they knew it. When I say the government, I'm talking about the FBI and the CIA, but yet they never did anything with the information. So Kash Patel knows this, and Pam Bondi knows this. So what I say is the ball's in their court. I'm confident there's going to be accountability with the government, deep state actors involved in the cover-up. I hope the Trump administration will do something and bring the Biden family in for some questioning.
So, as we kind of touched on earlier, you had frustration with the way Congress was operating. Clearly right now, the grassroots has some frustration with Congress because they're seeing these toxic cuts and spending cuts and things like that, but yet we continue to spend the same amount of money as it marches on. Within reason, I mean, obviously you can't change the Constitution or the way Congress is structured, but what would you, if you had the ability, if you were speaker, or if you had control of the ability to pass rules or really just kind of grab a hold of some of these other Republicans and talk to them, what kind of changes do you think Congress needs to make to be both more responsive to the base while at the same time accomplish more, not hold back important work like the kind of work you were doing?
The problem is the Senate, and in the House, we try to pass. You're supposed to not pass the CR. That's not how it's supposed to work, a continuing resolution. What you're supposed to do is pass 12 different appropriations bills, right? Appropriations for most of the cabinets, education appropriations. You got your military appropriations. You've got, appropriations for commerce and for energy and education. And then once that's passed, then they're supposed to go to the Senate, and the Senate's supposed to do that. The Senate hasn't passed an appropriation bill. I've been in Congress 8.5 years. It's probably been 20 years since the Senate's done that. And the fact that you have to get 60 votes, we can pass even now with the Republican majority in the Senate. And remember, we had a Democrat majority in the Senate the last 2 years. And then before that, we were in the minority when the Senate was in the majority. So we've got a Republican majority in the House, a Republican majority in the Senate. If we pass a conservative set of spending bills the way we're supposed to with cuts, which, I don't know that we got Republicans that would vote for some of the cuts. Depends on how big the cuts were, I guess. We send that to the Senate. They've got to get 60 votes. And let's say Susan Collins and McConnell and the more moderate senators, let's say they vote for that. That's 53 votes. Let's say Fetterman votes for it. That's 54. You're still 6 votes short. So what happens is the moderate Republicans in the House say, I'm not going to vote for these cuts in these spending bills because they're not going to go anywhere in the Senate.
Mm-hmm.
And
Now, how does, this is now my ignorance. I mainly focus on state politics. For those of you listening that listen to me often that think I'm super intelligent and always know what I'm talking about, I'm about to expose I don't exactly know when it comes to the federal government. What is reconciliation bills, though, where you only need a simple majority to pass them? How does that fit into that conversation?
A reconciliation bill is the only bill that just takes a simple majority in the Senate. So the only time you hear reconciliation bills is when you have a scenario like we have now, where the president, the Senate majority, and the House majority are all the same party. So it becomes a partisan bill where you don't need anyone in the minority. Every other bill takes 60 votes in the Senate. You're always going to need Republican votes and Democrat votes because there's never going to be a situation where there's 60 in the same party in the Senate. So reconciliation only takes a majority. It only matters when they're all the same party, when the House is a majority, the Senate's majority, and the White House all in the same party, like we have now. The last 2 times you had budget reconciliation passed was when Obama was president. He had, Democrat Senate majority, Democrat House majority. They passed Obamacare, which was a huge bill, terrible bill, but it was a huge bill. Then when Trump was president, the first 2 years we had that scenario with a Senate majority, a House majority, and then he was in the White House. We passed the Trump tax cuts. He tried to do the repeal of Obamacare, but that's when McCain went like that and it failed. The next reconciliation bill was the Trump tax cuts of 2017. So what we're trying to do now is extend the Trump tax cuts because they expire this year. But we're also trying to put all of his border security on there to where the return to Mexico policy and all that, because you can't get 60 votes in the Senate. The Democrats they don't want to deport anyone, even if they're a murderer. They don't want to deport anyone. So we're trying to put all this legislation on there. And for for it to comply with the rules of budget reconciliation, it has to balance out like nothing else. In Kentucky, you keep up with Kentucky politics, they have to have a balanced budget.
Sure.
In Washington, you don't. That's why we spend, that's why Congress continues to spend $2 trillion a year more than it takes in. But reconciliation has to balance. So but you can only apply cuts to mandatory spending. Mandatory spending is Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, federal employee benefits, defense. That's mandatory spending. So it's really limited. Like all this USAID money, all these grants that Trump and Elon Musk talked about, that doesn't apply to budget reconciliation. It has to be mandatory spending. So it's really difficult to agree on the cuts with the moderate Republicans, but it's the only way to pass the Trump agenda is the budget reconciliation, because there's not a Democrat in the Senate or the House that's going to vote for it. So we're working with the president, and people say, what are you going to support? What level of cuts are you going to support? I'm going to support whatever Donald Trump wants. He's got a mandate. He won my district by 47 points. And he's trying to do this, and Trump's not getting everything he wants. It's not going to be a perfect bill, but at the end of the day, it's going to be what he campaigned on. So hopefully we can get it done with Republicans, because there's not going to be a single Democrat vote for it.
Well, coming up after this, we'll discuss a little bit here about what's going on into the future after this short break. And you're back here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show, joined by Congressman Comer. He's joined us through the show. We've been talking about his book, All the President's Money, talking about Congress, shifting gears a bit. I know you get asked all the time because we got the big Senate race coming up. We got the governor's race coming up. All that's coming up. First, can I safely say that you're not going to be running for Senate? Can we safely say that?
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. You're not running for Senate. Okay. Yep. And can we safely say you're at least considering running for governor again? Considering it.
I'm strongly considering running.
Okay, there you go. So we can say you're
down the road.
We can safely say you're considering it.
Strongly considering. Yes.
Yeah, strongly considering it. Absolutely. So, obviously, I can see why a congressman such as yourself would want to be governor. I mean, you're right now you're not to diminish your position, but you're 1/435th of 1/2 of 1/3 of the federal government, right?
That's right.
Compared to, being pretty much like 70-ish% considering the other constitutional officers and their powers, if we're to weight them, as governor, you'd be about 70-ish% of one branch so 1/3 of the state government. And so you have a lot better ability to put in place policy, problem solve, deal with the issues you see. But why would a congressman want to run for Senate? This is something that is confusing to me. I mean, you can Hal Rogers it, right? You can be there pretty much once you win a congressional seat, as long as you don't become a Liz Cheney. You could stay there forever if you wanted to. Why would somebody who, I don't know, let's say somebody like Andy Barr, want to run for Congress versus staying in the House? What drives these congressmen to do that?
Well, I'll speak for myself. I don't know about Andy. I'll let him answer that. But with me, I sincerely believe in term limits. And if you want to, we were talking about a broken Congress. There's two things that have to happen to fix Congress. If these things don't ever happen, it's only going to get worse. Number one is term limits. The longer these members stay, the harder they are to deal with, the more bitter they get. It's just, you look at the ones that want to keep sending money to Ukraine. It's the old members that have been there for decades. They just, this is the way we've always done it. We've always sent foreign aid. We've always paid for wars around the world. We're the policemen for the world. It's America's responsibility. We can't afford it. That's mine. We can't afford it. Term limits is the first solution to the problem. Second is a balanced budget amendment. Like we said earlier, in Frankfurt, you have to have a balanced budget. Now, you could argue the budget's really not balanced if you figure the pension system, but at the end of the day, they don't spend more than they take in their general fund. Totally opposite in Washington. If we had to balance the budget in Washington, you wouldn't see what Trump rattled off in his speech the other night. You wouldn't see sending money to Saudi Arabia for LGBTQ Sesame Street. You wouldn't see these silly grants Rand Paul talks about because there wouldn't be any money to do it. So I believe that. Having said that, my heart's always been in Kentucky. I've been in Washington 8.5 years, and if I ran for governor in 2027, that would be 11 years in Washington. I think 12 years is a pretty good amount of time for term limits. People say, oh, we don't need term limits because seniority matters. Seniority doesn't matter in the House. Seniority matters in the Senate. I became chairman of a committee faster than anyone in the last 3 decades. I became the head of the top Republican on the Oversight Committee in 3 years. I leapfrogged everybody with seniority. You can rise up in the House if you have a skill set. So the old defense of being against term limits is we need the seniority. You can, if you're effective, I think you can bypass the seniority. And with Kentucky, in 2027, 47 out of the last 55 years, we've had a Democrat governor in Kentucky.
Sure.
Republican, we nominate Republicans that are good people, but they just don't win. And the reason Democrats win the governor's race and can't win anything else is because of the turnout model. Louisville and Lexington TV cover the governor's race. Those are primarily Democrat areas. But you look at where I grew up in Monroe County, all down that Tennessee line, that's in the Nashville TV market. You go down to far southeastern Kentucky, that's in the Knoxville TV market. Far southwestern Kentucky is in the Cape Girardeau, Missouri TV market. You go up Owensboro, Madisonville, Henderson, they're in the Evansville TV market. Northern Kentucky's in the Cincinnati TV market. Ashland, that area is in the Huntington, West Virginia TV market. None of those cover the governor's races. That's where all the Republicans are. I think if we nominated a Republican from those areas that's represented those areas, that we would have a better chance at winning because we've got 3 days to vote now. Right. And if you've got a grassroots organization, you should be able to overcome the fact that the Democrats have the advantage because Louisville and Lexington TV cover the governor's race. So you have always a huge turnout in Jefferson and Fayette County, which is not going to end well for Republicans. And then the state employees get half a day off to vote, and they vote overwhelmingly Democrat. Now we've got, issues with some of the teachers voting Democrat, and it gives the Democrats an advantage in the governor's race. I think that the first step is you got to win the governor's race.
Sure.
And we haven't been doing that. 47 out of 55 years, a Democrat, that's unacceptable. So, yeah, go ahead.
When you look at the last race with the Cameron race, then, you talk about getting out in those areas in grassroots and things. Personally, we can like Cameron all we want to, but the definition of a good campaign is one that wins. Typically, a good campaign is one that wins. And so if you were running for governor, what specifically would you have done differently that you think, you look at the Cameron campaign, you're like, they really fell short here where they had an opportunity to win?
Yeah. Well, you look at, and I like Daniel Cameron. I don't have anything negative about Daniel.
Yeah, this isn't about him as a person.
Right,
it's
right.
about,
but he was attorney general, but I don't feel like he took advantage of meeting people. He didn't travel the state while he was attorney general and go into the Cumberland counties and the Christian counties and up in the Carter counties and the Owen counties and all these counties are in the other TV market and develop relationships. So he didn't have like the best relationships with the local elected officials. And if you're going to get a turnout in these rural counties that are overwhelmingly Republican, these counties that Trump would get 80% of the vote in, but what happens is they don't vote. People in Kentucky vote for their sheriff and they vote for president. And if you're not on the ballot with a sheriff's race or a president's race like the governor, then the turnout's going to be low. You've got to have an organization to get these courthouse people, these magistrates, motivated to turn people out. I mean, there were judges that they didn't even tell their employees in the courthouse to go vote in the governor's race.
One thing Beshear was known for too, I mean, my feedback I got from the magistrates and things when I was meeting with them in 2023, when I was running in the primary for treasurer, was that Beshear is petty. He wants his dog and pony shows and everything else when he gives you money, but he does give you the money. And that seemed to be, to what you're saying, if they're looking at it, they're like, take it or leave it. We don't really care. Beshear cuts us the checks. What is Cameron going to do differently? That did seem to be apathetic.
It is.
At least.
You got to have a platform that motivates people to be for you. Because of COVID, Washington has just poured money into Frankfurt. I mean, they've had more money to build more roads, to build water. I mean, they've just had so much money, which has created a huge inflationary problem in America. Every state's had money. Beshear's nothing special. They just poured money in COVID and stimulus money and that infrastructure bill that wasn't about infrastructure. They just showered these states with money, and Beshear and Rocky Atkins, they got to travel the state, and they went in all these rural counties and patted people on the back and hugged them during storms and stuff, and handed out more money, and they became popular. But even with that, a Republican still win in Kentucky. You just got to really focus on these outskirt counties. And if you look at Cameron in November, the Republicans only had not Republicans in the state, the turnout was less than 40%, but in the presidential race, it's 60%.
Sure.
And those 20% are Trump voters that aren't going to vote. So hopefully, I think if we've got to win, but we've got to have a message that resonates. This free money from Washington is over. So the next governor is not going to be able to have money coming in like manna from heaven, like Beshear's had. You're going to have somebody that's willing to take a stand and say, just like what we're doing in Washington with Musk and Trump, look, we're going to have to look at everything and make sure that our money's being spent. There's government services that need to be provided, but there's people on the government rolls that shouldn't be on the government rolls. We should have work requirements for people on Medicaid. Medicaid's for people is a temporary program for children, poor children, and disabled people. It's not for people my age that just don't want to work. And we've got to fix those Medicaid rolls. We've got to support public education, but we've got to also say, look, we've got problems in their public schools. There's kids that are graduating that can barely read. They can't do basic arithmetic. They can't write. And the classroom teacher is is the hardest working person in the school system, but they're the lowest paid person in the school system. So I think we can have a discussion about public education without offending the teacher. So this is all what I think we have to look at in 2027.
Well, Congressman, thank you so much for joining me today, talking about your book, talking a little bit too about Kentucky here. People can buy your book, on Amazon, anywhere they want to.
Amazon, Barnes and Noble. Yeah, all the Barnes and Noble stores have them. Amazon's the quickest way to get one, and all the President's Money. And I think the people that have read it, it puts a whole different perspective on what we went through doing that investigation and exactly what the Biden family did. So I tell people, get past the first 4 chapters and it's a pretty good read. The first 4 chapters, we have to introduce all the foreign names and what they did. But once you get past that, it gets pretty interesting.
Well, I can tell you, I don't typically nonfiction. It's sometimes a slog for me to get to. I truly enjoyed reading this one. Thank you so much, Congressman, for your time. And thank you all for tuning into the Andrew Cooperrider Show. We'll see you back here later this week.